Hi, my name is Nico. It's my privilege to be one of the ministers here at church. And today we're looking at community and a passage which is very well known. We find Jesus with his disciples and he decides to spend some time with him. And as they go off, loads of people who are interested in what he has to say follow them and go with them. And therefore, Jesus says that he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. And he didn't kind of stop and plan what he was going to do. He was with his friends. There was a need. He just responded. But then it got late in the day and the disciples start feeling a bit uncomfortable because they thought, well, we have to feed all these people and we don't have the means to do so. So they come up to Jesus with a very logical and reasonable request. They say, this is a remote place and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. And Jesus replied, you give them something to eat. And Jesus tends to have these responses with his disciples. And so they go and do their best. They go out, they start asking around, and they find out that there's 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And they bring that back to Jesus and they say, this is what we have. And Jesus breaks the bread and then they all share in a meal and 5,000 people eat, or more actually. And we don't know how that happens exactly, but we do know that at the end of the day, they were all fed. And it was all through the work of Jesus. And today we're looking at community as a hope builder. And this passage, we can look at it through many lenses, but if we look at it through the lenses of community, we can see that actually, if we look at the disciples as the church and the rest of the people there as a wider community, we can get a lot of learnings out of this passage. So the disciples see that there's a need and they don't know what to do. So they come to Jesus, and that's a really good way to start any action, is when we don't know what to do, just go to Jesus. And they get from Jesus a command to go and feed them. And they realize that this command seems impossible. It would cost them 6 months' wages to feed everyone, and they don't have the money and they don't even have the food available. So the task they're given is impossible. And our task as a church is also actually impossible to do in our own strength. But then what they do is they try their best and they get the resources they have and they come back to Jesus with what they have. And that's another great learning. We gather what we have and we offer it to Jesus and see what he can do with it. So we learn that the disciples are given an impossible task, but they partner with God, they see what Jesus wants to do, and at the end of the day, through Jesus, they are able to do it. And church is one of those amazing groups that lives to serve its community, to help others out. It's a place where one has bread, and the other one has the vision to share it with others, and the other one has the intelligence to ask Jesus for help, and the other one is ready to give that bread out. And we all together building God's kingdom with what we have and who we are. And just the other day, we were given a toy house, which you'll see now on screen. And we were able to kind of put it in through the fence, through the car park. But then we realized that we weren't able to take it to the garden where we wanted to put it for our kids to play. So we had to try and make it go through that passageway. And actually, we tried to do what Benj is going to try now. Yeah, we're going to try and put the house that way, over there. So could you pick up your arms and try and put both? Can we try and pass the house over there?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, well done. We're going to try. And I actually stood there in tiptoes on that same chair with my hands held high, trying to make the house go over the fence and into the garden. and I realized I couldn't do it. So we then had to go and look for another solution. And at the end of the day, we realized we weren't able to put it in by ourselves. We had to do it through our neighbor's house. And that meant that the task we were going to do was going to be impossible for us to do by ourselves. We needed people around us to help us do it. And actually, if you look at the Bible and this passage, we realize that the task we are given is impossible to do by ourselves. We have to do it with others, and especially with Jesus. And as we know, in one way or another, we've all been affected by our community, by our church community. We all are who we are today because of a church community. There's not just one person who has affected your spiritual life. It's probably one person who drew you to church or whose example you followed, maybe a family member. But then there's been people teaching you and people you've drawn alongside, you've served together, you've done God's work together, you've heard their stories, you journeyed together. And there's so many people who have had an impact on our lives. And we are who we are because of the church community. And I'd like to just share a short video from Mark London sharing about how the house group has affected him in his life.
Well, in the 17 years that I've been in our house group, we've been through bereavement, divorce, redundancy, parenting challenges, and throughout all of that time, the house group has been the very personification of the church. It's provided support, love, laughter, guidance, advice, and it's just been there like a comfort blanket around us all when times are tough and when times are good.
So going back to our story, in this story, sometimes we might be the kid who brings the bread, and sometimes we might be the person who decides to speak to Jesus and say, what are we supposed to do? And sometimes we are the person who actually comes to Jesus with what they have and says, Jesus, this is what we have, just bless it. And sometimes we might be the person who is hungry and thirsty and just needs to be fed by someone else. In this story, we could be any of these people, and probably during our lives, we are the different people in the story. But the truth is that as a church, if we want to follow Jesus, we have to do it together. As Christians, if we want to follow Jesus, we have to do it with the church. If we want to build God's kingdom, we need others. We can't do it by ourselves. All the great things that God has done in history has always been through a community, not through one person by themselves. This week, we celebrated many years from the death of William Wilberforce, who is one of my big heroes. And one of the things that has struck me from his life is that actually he had a journey with God where, this is the 18th century, he was deciding if he was going to be a minister or a politician, and he felt called by God to be a politician. And actually he fought all of his life to abolish slavery in the UK. And what's really interesting is that it wasn't him by himself. Actually, they had a group, a society of people who were fighting together, who were gathering and praying and studying the Bible together, and came up with these ideas and ways in which they could fight against this injustice. And in the midst of what we're seeing as a society today, with Black Lives Matter, and the church has always been in the forefront in the fight against racial injustice. These guys together found ways in which they could fight an injustice and in which they could partner with God to do God's work, to do what they felt God was calling them to do. And actually, just before he died, they were able to abolish slavery here in the United Kingdom. And that's amazing. And if we look at our church's history, and there's so much we've accomplished in the last few years, just think about all the news about refugees going around a few years ago, and then suddenly someone having the vision and the idea to share with others about what can we do with this issue, and then a group of people joining in, and someone helping with the financing, and someone helping with the legal aspect of it, and someone having the vision, and others joining in, and lots of us praying. And even though there's a core group working, there's loads of us just supporting, and we're able to bring a refugee family from Syria. And throughout the last 30 years, how many people in Ashtead have gone through an Alpha because of all of you actually inviting people around? And there's been hundreds and probably thousands of people who did Alpha in Ashtead because of this church community. And through this church community, so many people have been touched and transformed and loved and cared for. Think of the amount of young people who left this place to be leaders in different churches. What God has done so far is amazing. But there's more God wants to do through us, with us, and we need to do it together as a community. And I would like to end with a quote from Henry Nouwen, who is an absolute legend, and he says, "The church is not an institution forcing us to follow rules, but a community inviting us to still our hunger and thirst at its table." We are a community inviting us and others to still their hunger and thirst at Jesus' table. And to do so, we need different skills and talents, gifts and passions, vision. We need to do it together to accomplish God's dreams for our community. It's not the same if you don't participate. Church will never be the same if you don't engage. God calls us to come with our fears and our doubts, with our limited understanding and lack of faith, when we are really thirsty and hungry, when we are tired and disengaged. But He also calls us to come with our dreams and our purposes and our passion and our hopes and our talent and our wacky ideas. Come and let's figure out together what God is calling us to do together. God joined us in this place at this time to do His will in this place. And it's amazing to think that those first disciples were called to try and feed 5,000 people. We are called to try and bless and care for 15,000, 20,000 people living in Ashtead and surroundings. And it's an impossible task. But if we come to Jesus with what we have, if we come to Jesus and say, we've got 5 loaves of bread, 2 fishes, and here we are to do your will, then we will be surprised and amazed by what God can do. But to do so, we need to engage, we need to be part of it. We need to give ourselves to each other, to the community, to God, and build His kingdom here. So I really like to encourage you to engage with church, where you are super engaged or not that engaged, where your faith is up there or down here. Engage with God, because God is inviting us together as a community to build His kingdom in this place.